Hi, I'm Eugene Sakai with Studio S Squared Architecture, and here with me is Isabel Guglielmo, who will assist in discussing Phase 1C, the public hearing process. So not all projects require public hearing, fortunately, because it is a very lengthy, very subjective, sometimes stressful process in which a lot of the project is kind of out of our control. Essentially, when you have to go to a public hearing, you need approval of the hearing body, either the hearing officer or in some cases a full commission of appointed officials to review and approve your project relative to their own opinions about what is appropriate for your jurisdiction. So a public hearing is actually a fairly courtroom-like experience in that it's conducted in a government venue, typically your city hall or your county supervisor's building, whatever the case may be. Um, and it involves a series of formal presentations and then a period of open public comment. So the first formal presentation will come from the planning staff, who will write a staff report that gets reviewed by the reviewing body before the hearing and presented again at the hearing for the benefit of the public to hear. Typically, that report will also conclude with a recommendation to the approving body, either to approve or deny the project as designed. After that presentation by staff, then the applicant gets to speak. So typically we ask our homeowner clients to lead off with a couple of minutes of discussion, and then we'll fill in the rest of the time with a formal presentation that we'll prepare in advance of the hearing. And you'll see an example of that in just a bit. Following that presentation, there will be a period of open questions for the reviewing body to ask of the applicant and its design and your design team, followed by an opening to the public for their opportunity to speak either in favor or in opposition to your project. Upon closing the public hearing, after all speakers have spoken, at that point, the deliberation begins and ultimately a vote is cast either up or down for approval or denial or continuance of your project. So we're going to go over these steps in a little bit more detail here. One of the first things that we will do upon learning or upon realizing that we have a hearing date coming up is begin preparing a formal presentation. So as we mentioned, there is a limited amount of time that we have to make our case as to the merits of your project. Isabeau, so you prepared several presentations for our office. What in your mind, what goes through your mind when thinking about appropriate content for a presentation, given the limited amount of time we usually have?
So one of the important things to know is if there is any neighbor opposition, it's important to know that from the start because you want to address their concerns, and you want to address how maybe their concerns are unfounded or how we're mitigating something. So it's always good to know that ahead of time because that could change the course of the presentation a bit. But it's also good to go over and highlight how we have done outreach to the neighbors. And it's also good to highlight any positive feedback that we have seen from the neighbors, any positive letters. It's good to show that there is support for the project, as well as it's good to do a general overview of the house itself, because this is the first time it's being presented to the council. So this is the first time they're really seeing it. So you want to show basically the design and how it fits in with the context of the neighborhood, how it's sensitive to that. It's good to show if, for example, you're doing a two-story home, locations of other two-story homes nearby, and that kind of thing, just to show how our project, yes, how it's sensitive to the neighborhood, how it's sensitive to the design guidelines, and why it should be approved as is.
So Isabeau, what we just talked about was a situation in which you're presenting a project for the first time to a planning commission or a reviewing body. How might it differ in a situation like what we have here where we're presenting for a second or third time?
Yeah, so if we're going back to the DRC, that means that it was denied the first time, and that means that they provided a list of comments for us to address. So the presentation is going to differ because they're familiar with the project. We've already presented it the first time, so we're not doing a general overview of the project anymore. We're instead going over how we address the comments they provided during the first DRC. So we like to prepare graphics, like you can see here, to show how by addressing their comments, how this has changed both the floor plan and the massing. So you can see the original design versus the new one instead of just showing them side by side. We often like to overlay them because this gives a clearer idea of where the massing has been either stepped back or reduced, or the floor plan has been altered to address their comments, and it's often much more powerful than just showing the before and after image.
So thanks for that, Isabel. That's a great summary of what we typically try to do in our applicant presentations. In some cases, if a project is especially contentious, in very rare cases, we may recommend that you retain a land use attorney. We've linked to a couple of really good ones here who've helped us on our projects. Hopefully that won't be the case, but in some cases, you might have particularly antagonistic neighbors, or particularly maybe one neighbor who unfortunately appeals your project all the way up to the highest levels of government. In those situations, a land use attorney might be well served to be on your team as counsel. Some of the things that you can do as a homeowner in terms of facilitating the process, and we touched on this in our earlier video, but continue outreach to your neighbors. Just because they might have appealed your project or are showing opposition to your project, it doesn't mean you should break off communications with them. In fact, if anything, you might want to actually broaden the communications with them, because if you turn your back on them, it's more likely they're just going to be even more antagonistic towards you, and that will show up in these public hearings. Even the pretense of engagement with a neighbor, just the effort, in other words, that you make, will go a long way to showing the government officials that you are trying, and that you are trying to hear their concerns, and that does carry a lot of weight. As we touched on, you are the applicant. We are your consulting team in support of your application. So we do think it's best to have you say a few words on behalf of your family and your project at the outset of our 10 minutes of presentation time. It doesn't have to be very lengthy, really just a quick summary of who you are, why you want to do the project, what's attracting you to this particular site or street or block or neighborhood. Just keep things positive, light, upbeat, and turn it over to us, and we'll handle the rest. So here we have the overall process map for phase 1C. Unlike a lot of our other phases, really there's not that much for you as the owner, us as the design team here in orange and green to really do for you. We're kind of at the mercy of the city, the hearing officers, the neighbors to an extent, to see what happens to your project. So as you move through these various phases, essentially there are loops for either the project being approved, denied, continued, appealed. A lot of these things are unfortunately out of your direct control. In the event that we are continued with revisions, our team will certainly coordinate with the design team to get the revisions done in a timely way and resubmit for a second round of review. In the event of an appeal, we will also certainly support and represent you in that effort. Possibly, if the appeal goes high enough, and we touched on this earlier, we might recommend the use of an attorney. This overall process can be frustrating because a lot of it is out of your direct control. Isabel, any tips on what a homeowner can do to maintain sanity during this particular phase?
Yeah, so it can be a really long phase, or it can be drawn out even longer, depending on if we get comments from the DRC, we get denied the first round, how many rounds there may be. So it's good to, in the process, communicate with the neighbors, try and see if there's anything you can do to appease them. If there is neighbor opposition, maybe start working on your idea books for phase two. Not just sitting there feeling like you can't really do anything, you don't really have any control of what's going on. Instead, you can think about the next phase, which is interior design, which is always really exciting. And then just kind of, when you're focused on those, then this will just be happening in the background and focus less on this stuff that's out of your control.
That's very good advice. We as your architect will certainly make every effort to submit a design that we think can be approved. And generally, our projects go into these public hearings with full support from planning staff for approval. However, these reviewing bodies, be they a planning commission, design review commission, a zoning administrator, they are an independent body, and they do not always blindly accept the staff recommendation, particularly in the event of neighbor opposition. So buckle up, be prepared. Hopefully, we've prepared you in previous phases for what to expect, and just be patient because it can be a difficult and arduous process. But rest assured, we've taken dozens, if not hundreds, of clients through these processes in one city or one jurisdiction or another, and we will certainly do the same for you. We look forward to helping you through this, and we'll see you in the next phase. Thanks a lot.